All right, guys, I am very, very excited today. We have a pretty interesting video today. We're going to be talking about quantum physics, quantum mechanics, quantum logic, and irrationality, transcending traditional classical 3D rationality. In this video, it's exactly that. We're going to be talking about quantum physics first, how that transcends the traditional rational 3D way of relating objects in the world to each other. That's the scientific manifestation of 4D irrationality. Then we're going to talk about quantum logic and maybe some other philosophical ideas. Same thing, how those also signal a transcending 4D irrationality rather than a now deficient 3D rationality. And then we're going to discuss the direct connections between the two. Because, of course, with these structures, remember, it's never just one subject, right? It's philosophy and science. The new structure, the new way of relating objects in the world to each other expresses itself in all aspects of human expression. So not just one or two, but we're going to be sticking with just these two in this video. And we're not going to be talking about everything. So this is going to be a little bit of a spoiler for my Seeing Through Gebser series. And there's more here. Like I said, we're only going to be doing one subject, and then we're not fully realizing this entire subject of science. But it should be fun. We're going to get into some cool ideas. Now, originally, I was actually going to put this in the Seeing the World Integrally series, but then I thought, well, shit. I mean, the whole point of this video, or at least a major point of this video, is to try to show that we are transcending the traditional, now deficient 3D rational way of doing things. So I thought, we are kind of killing rationalism here. So I guess it's possible I might upload this video on both playlists, but I doubt it. It'll probably just be a kill rationalism. So thank you guys so much for continuing to watch. I love you guys. Like I said in my note a few weeks ago, I am not planning on ending this series. Don't think that just because I haven't uploaded in 2 weeks in this series that it's done all of a sudden. No, I could do this series for years. I don't see any reason to stop now. All right, so without further ado, let's get right into it. So today we're going to be... Okay. So the connection, the first thing you have to understand is the connection between quantum mechanics and quantum logic is more than mere terminological similarity. Rather, they are connected because they both reveal the plentitude of time, quote-unquote, behind the 3D rational conceptions and systems. So the reason why we're drawing any sort of similarity at all, it's not because we just took two random disparate things and called them quantum, and now magically, all of a sudden, they're supposed to be connected. No. It's like I said, they both reveal time and its plentitude behind. Now, of course, behind is a spatialized notion, so that's rational. Don't get too lost on that, but behind the traditional rational, mental, spatialized understanding of time. And, okay, so we'll start with quantum physics and mechanics. Now, we're going to be getting into science here. I'm not a scientist. If you're someone who maybe likes this series for the... maybe you're not into philosophy and you're into poetry, or maybe you're into art or music, and maybe you just want to kind of kill that rationalism and learn for better creativity. Give it a shot. It'll be hard. It'll be difficult, but just give it a shot. We're going to be getting very abstract here. It's going to be fun. But, of course, the great thing is we have Jean Gebser guiding us through this, and he is the man. So let's get into it. The first thing to understand is that these new 4D discoveries happen through invisible mathematical formula, the only thing capable of perceiving the invisibly systatic elements. Now, of course, a systatic element is, simply put, an element that conjoins parts into an integral whole. It's invisible. It's Gebser stuff. It's not spiritual woo nonsense. It has nothing to do with that. Planck's quantum of action, which we're going to talk about here in a second, that's a systatic element. The unconscious is a systatic element. It's got nothing to do with this dumb, irrational, spiritual stuff. But the findings and articulations of the new physics are expressed in a non-visualizable form, though not in the form of abstraction. So that's a key point here. So in a non-visualizable form. So remember, in Kill Rationalism Part 1 and 2, we talked about how the I is the organ of emphasis for rational thought, because rational thought really is perspectival thought. And perspectivity, of course, privileges what organ? The I. So, of course, rationality is going to privilege the visual. They are not going to take seriously anything that is not visual, particularly with the spiritual realm. If you can't see it, then it's done. But the point of new physics is that you can only perceive or see, if you will, these new discoveries through invisible mathematical formula. You can't see them to the eye. They cannot be encompassed visually. That's very important, and it also is important to say, though not in the form of abstraction. So we are understanding these in a non-visualizable form, similar to abstraction, but it's not abstraction. It's not. So we're going to be getting into it. So we can already see how we're already kind of breaking off the traditional 3D rational way of doing things. So let's quote Gebser. The mechanistic world image of classical physics, valid until 1900, has been, in the words of C. F. von Weizsäcker, quote, more thoroughly destroyed than one would have expected. This is not a misfortune, but rather a good lesson. An image of the world is more than a mere scientific theory. It must encompass, at least symbolically, the whole of reality. From the standpoint of the individually verifiable phenomena, this whole is invariably a matter of faith, a belief which is the precondition for our lives. The world image of classical physics, too, attempted to represent the whole, but as its means were inadequate, it necessarily failed to do so. Yet physics was the first of the natural sciences to possess a self-contained system, and therefore had the role of a showpiece, as it were, among the sciences independent of the image of the world. Perhaps this role now devolves on physics in a new sense, for the new physics is the first self-contained system of knowledge about nature, comprehensible in exact mathematical terms beyond the confines of the mechanistic worldview. So this is the key point here. When he talks about the mechanistic worldview that was valid of classical physics, of course, what was classical physics built on? Rationality. To put it simply, that's the classical mechanistic view of physics that, according to Gebser, but really according to a very highly respected scientist who others can disagree with. No one's denying this. No one's saying this is, I'm sure other scientists have other opinions. But the point is, the mechanistic worldview, the classic 3D worldview is gone. It's been, as he says, more thoroughly destroyed than one would have expected. Gebser claims that, quote, it is an essential component of the new physics that it is no longer conceptualizable. So we're transcending conceptualization, which is obviously a key element of the mental structure of rationality. So that's kind of like to get you, to orient you, to get you in the general direction of what we're doing. So let's talk about the characteristics of the new physics that Gebser lays out in The Ever-Present Origin. Number one, time, of course, that is integral time as an intensity, is taken into account for the first time, no pun intended. And the mere concept of time, that is, say, the mental, of course, when you hear concept, that's word association, rationality, right? That's the domain of mental structure. And the mere concept of time is superseded. So the positing of the individual spatialized units that are divided and separated and sectored from each other, that's done. Number two, the same holds true of the overstrained rational dualism. Number three, quote-unquote reality is shown to be no longer adequately and exclusively realized by means of mental conceptualization and empirical verification. So these are the top three most important characteristics of the new physics. And we're going to talk about how these characteristics sort of transcend the old characteristics of the old physics. So let's just go point by point. Number one, time is taken into account for the first time, and the mere concept of time is superseded. So what's happening here is 4D time. Time as an intensity, that is to say time properly understood, is finally being discovered and worked with, if you will, for the first time, as opposed to, like I just mentioned, the 3D mental understanding of time. Clock time, essentially. That's bullshit. And then, of course, when he says that this is obviously a reference to Einstein, how could it not be? It was Einstein that broke time out of its abstract, spatialized box and properly understood it as energy, or an aspect of the element of intensity that constitutes the world. That is what time truly is. An aspect of the element of intensity that constitutes the world. It is intense. It is in here. It is qualitative. It is not external and quantifiable. It's internal and qualitative. There you go. So time is now quote-unquote relative. And I know there are scientists who kind of get triggered over that word. Don't be... I know that. I'm aware of that. We're just doing kind of some pop stuff. I'm just trying to ease you in. We can have that discussion later on. But time is now relative, and the breakthrough is obvious. In the place of the classical system of a spatial world, there is now a space-time continuum. And this, of course, would later go on to be undercut by Planck, of course. Now, we can already see how time time as an intensity is superseding time as an extensity, because time as an extensity would say it's exactly that. It's external, and this is important, divided from space. It is space and time. Einstein says no. Two sides of the same coin, space, time. There is no separation here. You cannot divide space and time, not if you want to live in the world, in the modern world. A lot of the rationalists, they're essentially the intellectual version of the Gutenberg printing press, and we're trying to be the intellectual version of the internet. Like we're here. We're not lost in your old media, your old ways. Okay, hold on. Give me 1 second. Okay. But this is obviously a reference as well to Planck's quantum theory. So to quote Gebser again, his demonstration that nature does make leaps, as the saying goes, effectively demolishes our prevailing view of time. Our world is not constructed continuously, or with respect to time as a constant, as the mechanistic view of classical physics had held, the rationalist view, but rather discontinuously and unpredictably. Planck also discovered the agent of this discontinuity, the quantum of action, the new physical constant. So what happened was Planck divided it and divided and divided, obviously a hallmark of rational thought, until he eventually found that there indeed does exist a limit to this division. And at the very quote-unquote bottom of it was an invisible structuring agent that scales energy and connects it to frequency. So rather with this rational spatial idea of time, where it's this external continuous duration, where every moment is, in a quantifiable sense, kind of equal to the last. That's not what it is at all. In quantum theory, the world is consisted of like a trillion, billion, million moments of that. Each moment is qualitatively distinct from each other. Each moment is not a part of a larger connected whole. Each moment is its own whole onto itself, and it is ontologically separate from the other moments. So each new moment is like an individual energy packet that is quantifiably and qualitatively distinct from the energy packet that preceded it and will proceed it. In that sense, each new moment is different, but they are all the same insofar in that they all contain past and future integrated within it. So, of course, in my What is Time video, we talked about how the present moment always contains, if you will, or possesses, or integrates, that's a better word, past and future. Past and future are always accessible to you because the present moment is perpetual and the past and future are in the present moment. And then it also has of course, time carries with it the potential for a sort of irrational presence when you kind of put the brain aside and you feel present in being, in origin. But it's very important. So these new moments, if you will, these new energy packets, they happen so quickly that it makes it appear to the rationalists as if this is just a continuous phenomenon. It is not. It is acausal. It is discontinuous. How could it not be if these energy packets that are moments are qualitatively distinct, right? So if I was in the 9/11, if I'm a 9/11 survivor, let's say I was in the tower for an hour, for 58 minutes. That 58 minutes that I was in that hour, that's going to be more intense than the 58 minutes I don't even remember because I was in 8th grade health class and I was just kind of zoning out and daydreaming. There's a qualitative distinction here. When people say how right before they got into a car accident, their life flashed before their eyes. What's happened? What are they really referencing here? Time as an intensity. It became so intense that it brought with it everything because it was like, this is it, buddy. This is as far as it goes. And so that's the point. There's a qualitative distinction here. And Planck's quantum of action is exactly that agent that is responsible for the distinction in quality between moments. So Planck's quantum of action is this sort of invisible structuring agent that scales energy and connects it to frequency. So the quantum of action is the thing responsible for the qualitative distinction in moments. Sorry if I took a little too long on that one. And we also see this same principle evident in the idea with the atom bomb. I mean, we divided and divided and divided until we found what? Not space, but energy, right? Space-time, not space and time. Okay, and then to bolster the validity of these 40 truths, Gebser quotes Ernest Zimmer, who's another scientist. Planck's H, which is the quantum of action, that invisible structuring agent, seems to be a quantity with a higher degree of reality than most of the other quantities employed in physics. I'll repeat for emphasis. Planck's H, seems to be a quantity with a higher degree of reality than most of the other quantities employed in physics. So, according to this scientist, he's saying not only is Planck's systatic element the quantum of action, not only is it true, that invisible structuring agent, it's more true than your 3D electron. So very interesting. And, quote, that in the quantum of action we have a quantity which is measured by space-time. And also that, quote, the theory of relativity teaches us that we can arrive at a generally valid insight only if we do not view events as divided into space and time, but rather observe the four-dimensional world constructed of space-time. The action, being a part of the four-dimensional world of thought, is a universally valid property in contrast to energy, which Zimmer defines as spatial magnitude, for it belongs to a deeper and more inclusive region of truth. Therefore, Planck's insight that it must be understood in atomistic terms is a perception which touches on the most profound previous knowledge in physics. So, there you go. Sort of speaking to the greater validity, the higher degree of validity than even the 3D rational truths, which are supposed to be objective, by the way, which are supposed to be like the pinnacle of all epistemological certainty. Well, clearly the A-rationalists disagree. Here's a final point on this little subsection. You cannot understand that Planck's H intensifies Einstein's it, which is to say the principal matter, that there's an external world made of matter, and the time, essentially, is the intensity of the spatial world, space-time, remember, not space and time. Or you can't understand them or relate them at all if both are conceived of as categorical quantities, which of course would belong to the mental structure. And as long as there exists no means for expressing and highlighting their acategorality, So if we don't come up with these new terms, these new concepts, if you will, as Gebser calls them, we're going to have problems because we're not going to be able to transcend it. We're only going to be able to go backwards. So that was the first point. So time is being taken seriously for the first time. It's obviously a reference to Einstein, and then, of course, a reference to Planck's quantum theory. And this completely, Einstein sheds this idea that space and time are divided, so that's rational gone. Planck sheds this idea that life is this continuous mechanistic thing that is causal and continuous. No, it's acausal and it's discontinuous because each new moment's like a new packet, baby. Okay, second point, the supersession of dualism. Well, we'll spend the most time on science, by the way. This one is also obvious. So space and time are separate entities, not in reality, but only when framed as such by the rational projection made by the ego. Energy and mass are the same substance expressed in different form, giving off the appearance of difference, but they are identical. As Eddington says, mass is only another name for energy. So the dualism, one or the other, remember the negation, either or, antithetical. No, it's not space and time, it's space-time. So there's no dualism here. It's just one singular phenomena. No dualism. To quote Gebser again, the consistent application of such discoveries in quantum theory as the uncertainty principle has led to such statements like those of Andrew March, who observed that, quote, the world is inseparable from the observing subject and is accordingly not objectifiable. So two things, remember in my structures video, the world can't be objective because everything is dependent upon your position. Remember, science says it's not objective anymore, it's relative. Your world, the way it shows up to you, is completely dependent on your position in space-time. You and someone else who's traveling at an insane speed are going to have completely different conceptions, though it's going to feel real to them, just as real to them as it does to you. So no, it's not objectifiable necessarily. World versus man, object versus subject, these have become untenable from the standpoint of physics. Quote, more quoting from Gebser, further developments in quantum theory, such as those in wave mechanics, have verified that light, and therefore matter itself, invariably occurs both as a corpuscle and a wave. The rational, this is important, the rational inconsistency, of this basic fact of physics was not explained in terms of, say, a principle of duality, but rather by the establishment of the complementary principle by Niels Bohr. What implications can we draw from this data? We can infer in any event that the strictly rational scheme of thought can be best described as no longer adequate. It is true that it still provides makeshift solutions, but its universal validity has been shaken. So that's the supersession of dualism. Dualism. That's number 2. That's the second characteristic of the new physics. Now we're going to finish up with the third characteristic. Reality is shown to be no longer adequately and exclusively realized by means of mental conceptualization and empirical verification. We already kind of touched on this, but we'll keep going. Excuse me. Gebser, quoting Gebser, the non-visualizable nature of the present-day image of physics is a fact which is repeatedly emphasized in physical research. So physical research is showing that there's something there is non-visualizable, but we can still understand it through mathematical formula. The rationalists don't like this because it doesn't fit into their rational projection in their rational box. I don't care. I don't care. We're transcending you. All attempts to render the atomic structures and events in visual and graphical form and to force them into the realm of conceptuality, that is, the mental form of realization, may be considered today as failures. So every single attempt to take these irrational 4D truths and try to stuff them and fit them perfectly, 100%, into your 3D rational box has been a failure, and it makes obvious sense as to why it would be a failure, because everything that signals irrationality about irrational elements or aspects of the world and the human condition, by definition, are going to be without the characteristics or the hallmarks of rational thought. So yeah, it makes sense that when you're trying to you can't turn, when you try to turn black into white, you can't have black and white, right? It doesn't make sense. The mental form. One such attempt among many was the Rutherford-Bohr model of the atom, which was intended to show in visual form the processes in the atom. But as Arthur March observed, quote, it had to be abandoned by quantum mechanics and be replaced by a totally non-visualizable and purely mathematical construct. Since its visible graphic form could not be reconciled with the fundamental law of nature, the principle of indeterminacy. As Heisenberg has remarked, these atomic laws can be only imprecisely transposed into visual images for the atom, for Planck's quantum hypothesis, on which these laws are based, contains on principle a non-visualizable element. So we already kind of spoke earlier about the heavy bias of the visual with mental structure. That's downstream from perspectivity. As a consequence of quantum theory, physics also was compelled to abandon its venerable principle of causality. On the basis of the universal quantum of action discovered by Planck, we now know that the basic course of events is acausal, discontinuous, and indeterminate. Why is it acausal, discontinuous, and indeterminate? Because remember, each moment is not part of a larger whole that is this sort of infinite external duration. No, each moment is its own separate thing unto itself that is qualitatively distinct in terms of the energy it carries and the potential and the potency. So yes, when you have a series of different moments, we're not going to get causality anymore, right? We're going to get a causality. Because causality presupposes that rational understanding of continuity and order. We don't have that anymore. He quotes Arthur March again. Gebser does. Quote, it's important. Our intellect is inadequate to understand nature, and consequently we are unable to reproduce its mechanism by means of a conceptual construct. Very important, obviously. This is very clear. I almost don't even want to say anything. How this signals that we're getting beyond rational construct, or conceptuality. That's 3D stuff. The inadequacies of our intellect prevent us from capturing reality in a conceptual world. He continues, this is the standpoint arrived at by physics today. This is big. This is very important. This is the standpoint arrived at by physics today. The objective essence of things consists of a structure and not something of substance. Let us take, for example, the electron. Its appearance is that of something real, a substantial particle which belongs to the real and objective world and is not just conjured up by our imaginations. But let us not be deceived by this appearance. If we analyze in depth the experiences on which our faith in the existence of a substantive electron rests, nothing remains except a system of constant relationships, which is termed a structure in mathematics, so that we are required to accept these relationships and not the substantive particles as the true reality. And the extent to which our doubts about the objective existence of a substantive electron are correct is proven by our experience with particles which shed their physical properties and behave not like a corpuscle, but a wave. We will be returning to this later. This is very important. We will be returning to this. Okay, finally, in science, we got to talk a little bit of Schrodinger's cat. Just a little bit. We're not going to get super deep into the stuff. So what's the idea? We've all heard this idea before. A cat is placed into a sealed box with a radioactive atom, a Geiger counter, a vial of poison, and a timer set for 1 hour. If the Geiger counter detects a hint of radiation, the vial breaks, releasing the poison and killing the cat. If no radiation is detected, the cat remains alive. Is the cat dead or alive? You don't know, and you only know when you decide to measure, that is, open the box. The point is that your consciousness played the decisive role in determining the truth, whether the cat was dead or alive. The consciousness decided to measure. There you go. Is the electron face up or face down? You don't know until you measure. Same principle. We will be returning to this. Don't worry. We will be fleshing this idea out a little more. So now we're going to get into philosophy. So now we're going to talk about the characteristics of a rational philosophy that is superseding traditional rational 3D philosophy, according to Gebser. So number one, the incorporation of time as a proper element in philosophical thought. That is, say, time as an intensity. Of course, that was number one in science. Number two, the admission of the inadequacy of rationality. That would include dualism. That was also number two in science. And number three, the turn toward the whole and toward diaphaneity. And this one won't be too relevant here. But we will be talking about the first two. So the incorporation, of time as a proper element in philosophical thought. So in the book, Gebser gives a brief history going over people like Pascal, Hegel, and of course Bergson. It's important. It is worth writing about in his book, but it's not too relevant here. He doesn't go into it too much. He mostly talks about Bergson, who really takes time as an intensity into account for the first time. If you really want to understand someone who finally is at least starting to understand time on its own terms, read Bergson. I mean, if you're not going to read Gebser, but read Bergson. So now we're going to get into three-valued logic. And we're going to see how three-valued logic... I put this in the wrong section. I should put this in the admission of inadequacy of rationality. So now we're going to switch to number two. I don't know. I accidentally made a mistake. So now we're on point number two, the admission of the inadequacy of rationality. So we'll talk about three-valued logic first. Quote, Reichenbach's three-valued logic is based on the indeterminacy principle of the energy quantum discovered and formulated by Niels Bohr and Heisenberg. Reichenbach defines the new logic as follows, quote, the usual logic is two-valued. It is constructed with the aid of the truth values, true and false. Something's either true, something's either false. We invoke the third aspect of measuring thought to reconcile the two and privilege one over the other. Yet it is possible to introduce an intermediary truth value that could be designated as indeterminacy, and to apply this truth value to the group of propositions which in the Bohr-Heisenberg interpretation are called meaningless. If we have a third truth value called indeterminacy, then the tertium non datur, which is the what I just described, is no longer the definitive formula. There is the tertium, an intermediary value represented by the logical condition indeterminate. So we can already see how we have like a strict philosophical deconstruction of its own self, or at least an aspect of its own self. We have true or false, as I just explained. But now with three-value logic, no, we're not just doing the 1, 2, 3. Now we have 1, 2, and something in the middle. Indeterminacy. So now it's the three-valued logic. So we can see how we're transcending. We're going from 2, in a very numerical sense, to 3. And it's sort of, the idea is to offer a more holistic understanding of truth. Now, this is an admission of the failures of rationality. It is something, it's not that big of a deal. I don't think a rationalist would look at this and just think, oh, man, I'm screwed. I better switch up. I don't think it's anything like that. But it is an admission of the failures of the traditional rational way of doing things. It's just not that much of a sign. It's not that like earth-shattering. So now we're going to get into quantum logic. Now we're talking, people. So we're going to do some very basic laws of logic. The law of identity, A equals A, my microphone is my microphone. The law of non-contradiction, A cannot be both A and non-A simultaneously. So my microphone is a microphone. It cannot be my microphone. In my book, The New Media Invasion by John David Eber, which you all should go buy and read, is excellent. It can't be this at the same time. It's either the microphone or it's the book. No getting around it. Then we have the law of the excluded middle. A is either true or false, nothing in between. So my microphone exists in front of me right now, and that's either true or false. It is not a matter of opinion. It's not a matter of Big Lebowski, that's just your opinion, man, or whatever. It's no. Well, we're being rational. It's time to be rational. None of this subjective nonsense. Okay, that's nice. We're being rational right now. So those are the laws of logic that we will be working with, and we're going to try to show how quantum logic transcends these very basic, just simple 3D rational laws, vanishing points, if you will. So let's say I'm reading Gebser at night before bed, as I was doing the other night, and I heard the dryer in the basement make a noise. Immediately, I knew it was a dryer and nothing else. Not a hunk of metal, not an extension of the floor or wall, not a symbol of modernity. A dryer. But how do I know that? When I received the input or sense data, my consciousness immediately and rapidly employed a series of either-or questions in relation to the ontology of the object. So once I heard the noise and I realized it was a dryer, and of course this happened rapidly because I'm I'm a grown adult and I live, and this is what I do. This is my consciousness. I'm in the water. What happened was my consciousness in a quantum sense, which meaning it was happening it mirrors the rapidity that happened in science, is asking all these ontological questions about what that is. And we're going to get into that. So some of the questions might be, for example, is it an object in space? Is it natural or mechanical? Is it separate from the floor, the wall? Does it make noise? Does it move? Does it serve an active function? With each new question, the possibilities of being, the ontological status, which is to say what that thing is, the underlying core meaning of what it is, with each new question, those possibilities of being are limited. And then eventually, I settled on the dryer, which is rational. And this happens at a rapid pace, just like in quantum mechanics. So I believe this is called the, quote, alternative. Now remember, we talked about Gertaian morphology. That's the planza, the plant, the primordial process of the plant. So this is the primordial process, the underlying process that is non-visible of rationality. So, but what are the implications here? One, that our consciousness played the decisive role in determining the ontological status of the object in question, transcending the idea that the dryer as an objective entity exists separate to our consciousness. The quote-unquote dryer existed as the dryer, symbol, hunk of metal, extension of floor, wall, heat and noise source, and whatever else you could think of at the same time. It existed as all of those simultaneously, and it was only when our consciousness made the decisive judgment that the plentitude of being, with the capital B, collapses into one being. So it was the dryer wasn't necessarily just a dryer. It was a dryer, a hunk of metal, a symbol of modernity, and a heat source all simultaneously, and it was through quantum logic and the employment of these rapid-paced ontological either-ors that have eventually, I settled on the dryer. That's a very rational way of doing things. We'll obviously return to this. So let's return to the laws of logic before we do that. So the law of identity. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take what we just said and the implications of what we just said. And we're going to go back to the laws of logic and see how, at least in my opinion, the implications transcend the basic laws of logic. So law number one that we talked about, the law of identity. A is equal to A. So the object that caught my attention exists in an immaterial field in which all potential ontologies are simultaneously present. That's what I just talked about with the hunk of metal, the source, the heat source, the source of noise, and the symbol of modernity, and the dryer. They exist in an immaterial field in which all potential ontologies are simultaneously present. And only one is codified as an object when our consciousness chooses to do so. In this case, of course, it would be in accordance with logical thought. In the mythical structure, perhaps, the quantum logic, if you will, would have been in accordance with God and the 2D flat circle Gebser speaks of. So something would have been true, or an object would have been that object because God said so, essentially. That's kind of how it works. So we can already see that no, A is not just A. A is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, all through Z. Not only that, not only is A through Z, it's A through Z simultaneously. And if it's A through Z simultaneously, it's not A through Z simultaneously at the same time, because it could be all of them or it could be none of them at the same time. So no, A is not just A. So now we're going to our second law, the law of non-contradiction. A cannot be both A and non-A simultaneously. See point number 1. A is both A and non-A, and is all possible non-A's at once. Law number 3, the law of the excluded middle. A is either true or false, nothing in between. No, it is both true that the dryer is a dryer and simultaneously false that the dryer is a dryer, right? Because our consciousness is the one that is the decisive factor. It could be a symbol and it could be a dryer. It depends on how you want to look at it. So true and false in this view become entirely dependent on what questions are put to the ontological status of the object in question. So is it a dryer? Yes. Is it a symbol? Also yes. Is it true that it can physically shoot itself to Mars? No. Is it true that it can symbolically shoot itself to Mars? Sure, why not? It's symbolism. In many ways, it's a rational nonsense. So it's not either true or false. It's both true and false. It is both true that it's a dryer, and it's also false that it's a dryer, because it's 1 second it's a dryer, and the next second it's a symbol for modernity. Well, which one should I really privilege above all? Now, of course, we all know what the rationalists are going to say. The rational one. Not necessarily. You guys have been destroying society and civilization, so we're going to transcend you. But having said that, this is a key point. To be clear, this is not hyperskepticism or me granting you permission to revert backwards into deficient irrationality as you scorn efficient rationality. Do not do that. That is not what this is. This is not me coming out here and saying, oh, well, if I go into the highway and I'm driving 70 miles per hour and I take my hands off the wheel and I close my eyes, I'm going to survive because my consciousness says so. No. You will die. I will die. There's no getting around that. This is not denying the existence of the external world. My goodness. What it is trying to, quote, loosen up a little bit some of this objective stuff, because it's not necessarily objective. And what it does, it allows you to perceive the integral whole, because no longer are things divided into one or the other. Well, they can be both, and everything depends on how the consciousness employs the quantum logic, if you will. So do not go out and just do dumb things because you go, oh, well, technically my car doesn't have to be a car. It can be a symbol for poetic. Yeah, that's nice if you're doing poetry, right? It's nice if you're trying to be irrational or irrational, but when it's time to be rational, it's time to be rational. In many ways, this will change, hopefully, the way you view the world, but in many ways it won't at the same time. Like, for example, I just got off work. So when my boss says something like, I don't know, give this box to the customer, yeah, in theory, it's not a box objectively, because my consciousness plays the decisive factor, as we've said. In theory, it could be it could be a symbol, it could just be a hunk of cardboard, it could be whatever, something to rest my head on. That's nice, but I also live in the world in 2025. My boss needs to do this so he doesn't go out of business. So in many ways, it'll change your life. In some ways, it really won't. And this is a more traditional philosophical deconstruction of the universal validity of rational thought and traditional philosophy. So as we said, the three kind of points there, we've transcended them. And the point of the more traditional deconstruction is that there are other ways to attack the universal validity of rationality and philosophy. It doesn't touch on James or Jung's psychologizing or the existentialism, of Sartre and Jaspers. As a rationalist, I remember the psychologizing used to piss me off because it would undercut the universal validity of my rational deductions or whatever they were, my rational proofs, and that used to piss me off. I used to just remember not really acknowledging that and just kind of put that away, put that under. I don't want to look at that. A particular psychology, William James, I believe that's his name, right? And Jung, essentially the idea is that a particular psychology or psychological predisposition gives each philosophy its decisive stamp, as well as, to an extent, its validity. So perhaps you liked my rational philosophy because you had a psychological predisposition, whereas someone with a more irrational predisposition isn't going to like it. And we haven't touched on transcendental logic either, which is also an irrational manifestation, but that'll probably be a video for another day. So we are coming towards the end here. So now we're going to tie it all together. Direct connections between quantum physics and quantum logic. Let's just get straight to it. Remember Schrodinger's cat? Is the electron spin up or spin down? It exists as all, or in this case both, simultaneously, and only becomes one or the other when we consciously measure. Is the dryer a dryer or a symbol? It exists as all simultaneously and only becomes one or the other when we consciously measure. So irrationality transcends this idea that reality is just out there, fully formed and waiting like the rationalists would have you believe. Instead, it is co-emergent with consciousness. The ontology of a particular object or entity cannot arise without the codification of your consciousness. You cannot have ontological certainty or validity on anything without you being the one to impart that validity, or at least participate in it. So we'll remember the quote earlier, right? So we'll reintroduce the quote here. Quote, "This is the standpoint arrived at by physics today. The objective essence of things consists of a structure and not something of substance. Let us take, for example, the electron. Its appearance is that of something real, a substantial particle which belongs to the real and objective world and is not just conjured up by our imaginations. But let us not be deceived by this appearance. If we analyze in depth the experiences on which our faith in the existence of a substantive electron rests, nothing remains except a system of constant relationships, which is termed a structure in mathematics, so that we are required to accept these relationships and not the substantive particles as the true reality. And the extent to which our doubts about the objective existence of a substantive electron are correct is proven by our experience with particles which shed their physical properties and behave not like a corpuscle, but a wave." So in both cases, the classical 3D way of doing things has been surpassed. Electrons aren't even things in space anymore and only become one when we measure them as such. So it seems that their true ontology belongs to this amaterial ontological field of simultaneity and potential, and then when we measure the electron as an electron, when we measure this field as an electron, there's a potentiality for electrons. Same thing with the dryer, right? The dryer exists in this ontological field of simultaneity, and when we measure it as a dryer, it becomes a dryer. And then when he says the electron exists as a system of constant relationship, actually, yeah, I just talked about that. If so, in the last line I wrote here, if the tree falls and no one's around to hear it, it does not make a sound. So and there you go. That's pretty much it. Those are the direct connections. We talked about how the new discoveries in new physics transcended or at least embodied the three characteristics of new physics, I should say, that transcended the purely spatial world in which space and time are divided. We saw that with Einstein, of course, unifying space and time. They are the same thing. And we saw that with the quantum theory, that no longer are we doing this rational conception of time as this extended field or duration or whatever. No, now we got quantum mechanics. And then we saw also the laws of logic being transcended as well. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I had a ton of fun making this. Hopefully I explained things pretty clearly. I tried to be as direct as possible. I know we got a little abstract, and it's important for me to make sure that this series has a sufficient amount of intellectual rigor. I don't want to get lazy in that sense. I don't mind doing the Ted Kaczynski videos. I love doing those videos. Those videos are awesome. My favorite anti-rational stanzas. Those are great, but they're not quite as intellectually taxing, and I want to make sure I'm giving you guys what you need in terms of the intellect, because it's important. And I will also have a very cool and fun and interesting video hopefully coming out soon. I don't want to say too much, but this was not the video, that I've been teasing throughout the week or last week if you've been following my post or my Seeing Through Gebser series. There's another video that is a little different from what we usually do on this channel, so I'm very excited about that. I hope you guys learned something, or at least thought of some new cool ideas. Maybe you think it's all bullshit, but hey, I don't know. Maybe it'll serve as creative inspiration one day. But I love you guys. You guys are the best. And you guys have enriched my life more than anything. I love you. And I will see you soon. Thank you, guys.